It certainly feels like everything that we saw in Portland was a lie. The narrative about Trump's secret police, about unmarked cops, pulling up and snatching up protesters, unidentified police beating, arresting. None of it was true. It was all weird exaggerations. And now I think we have confirmation that the whole thing was a propagandistic tactic. Take a look at this story from The Guardian, which is an overt lie. Portland sees peaceful night of protests following withdrawal of federal troops. Thursday night's protest passed off without major incident or intervention by the police in the absence of federal officers. They didn't withdraw. There was no absence. They were literally still there. So how was it that last night was peaceful following the Portland governor saying there would be a withdrawal? It could be that Antifa and the far left retreated thinking they had won. The only problem? The night they announced the withdrawal, far leftists still were attacking the federal courthouse, though they didn't have the large numbers. I said yesterday the real test will be last night. Yesterday I said tonight, which I meant last night. Will large groups still show up and protest, even if there are no police? And they did. So I'm not entirely sure what the protests are focused on, necessarily. But the one thing that wasn't there was mortars being lobbed at the building, was attacks trying to cut down the fence, fires being started. And now, because of this, the narrative being pushed by many outlets, particularly left-wing outlets like The Guardian, is that it was all peaceful when there was no federal presence. The only problem? There literally is. Take a look at this story from Reuters. U.S. federal troops staying in Portland now, for now, Wolf says. Acting U.S. Homeland Secretary, Security Secretary Chad Wolf told Fox News on Friday that federal troops would remain in Portland until he was assured that the Oregon governor's plan to handle the daily protests was working, and said sending in the National Guard was still an option if the state did not handle the situation. I find this whole thing weird. Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland announced that he wanted a ceasefire with federal agents. It would seem that the riots were making Donald Trump look good. Americans seem to like law and order. All of a sudden, he says he wants a ceasefire. And this is actually being noted by people on Reddit, which I find truly fascinating, saying, under what authority does he have the ability to negotiate on behalf of these far leftists? And how is it now that the state has announced that the feds are withdrawing, even though they didn't, Antifa doesn't show up? The far left doesn't engage in this violence. Pretty weird, huh? Well, I can't tell you what it is. I'm not going to pretend to know why it is, but I will tell you this. They're lying when they say the feds have withdrawn, and they use weasel words to try and make the claim. But somehow, and for some reason, the far left has stopped attacking the federal courthouse. Weird, isn't it? That far leftists for 39 nights were besieging this courthouse, and Portland police weren't getting the job done. The feds come in, and all of a sudden the narrative emerges that Trump is sending in secret police to arrest people with unmarked federal troops and deploy them across the country, which is just not the case. It has not happened in the past, and it's not going to happen in the future. What we are seeing is Trump sending out law enforcement like FBI to various cities, and we're seeing the expansion of certain police units in Chicago, for instance. I want to read you this story, but I want to show you a few very important things. First, The Guardian is reporting it's a withdrawal. I don't know exactly what is going on. It's hard to know for sure because both sides are going to be claiming victory. What I can show you is that the feds are asserting they are still there. They're literally still in the courthouse. More police are being deployed, and we have, citing a story from Politico, citing imposters, feds urge lifting of court order protecting journalists amid Portland protests. So if the feds are currently filing suit or challenging, appealing in court, if they're still in the courthouse, and if state police are being deployed, why did all of a sudden the far left stop attacking the building? That I find interesting. But let's read what The Guardian has to say. They say, now here's the weasel word. The withdrawal of federal agents from frontline policing of demonstrations in downtown Portland significantly reduced tensions in the city overnight. This is just an overt lie. They did not withdraw. They did not withdraw from frontline policing. And what I've already seen from the left, as people start to point out they're still there, is they say, oh, no. They didn't withdraw. It's from frontline policing. They're trying to make it seem like the feds were proactively going out and attacking people. The feds have barricades around their building. They weren't leaving the barricaded area until people started tearing the barricades down, cutting them, starting fires. This is the narrative being crafted. Whether it's because journalists are completely inept or because they're doing it on purpose, that's the narrative. They want you to believe that as soon as the feds withdraw, peace emerged and everyone got to sing songs and dance. I'm curious as to how this all stopped. I'm not going to pretend. I know a lot of people are probably making some claims in the comments. Maybe you know, but let's read. They say protesters in support of Black Lives Matter once again rallied near the federal courthouse that became a flashpoint and the scene of nightly battles amid the swirl of tear gas, after Donald Trump dispatched agents to end what he called anarchy in the city after weeks of demonstrations. He called it a beehive of terrorism. Now, to be more optimistic, what we may actually be seeing is victory. That's it. The feds have been demanding that Portland get their act together, that law enforcement come out and stop Antifa. This may be the end of the Portland skirmishes, whatever you want to call it. Or it could be a temporary ceasefire. But again, to stress, I don't understand how it is that the far left, which are supposed to be, random activists, have just stopped as soon as the government said that, we've won. Maybe the far left just said, oh, we won, we're going to back off. But that doesn't explain why yesterday they were still out. We have this video from Andy No. Violent protests continued overnight outside the Portland federal courthouse. Rioters were more quickly repelled because they lacked the huge crowds that gave them better cover to commit acts of violence. I'm not going to, again, for the millionth time, pretend to tell you what's going on internally with these organizations, but I can tell you, boy, did they look bad the other day when it was announced that the feds were withdrawing and then no protesters showed up. They looked bad because the police are literally still there, and they're still there to this day. That's why I said yesterday, what happens tonight, as in last night, would be the most important. When Democrats were facing down with Donald Trump, like with the federal agents, all of a sudden it was this big issue of Trump's secret police. But now that they've deployed Oregon State Police to the building, the far left stops. Yeah. And it makes them look better, I suppose, but also it's kind of confusing. I thought they say this protest was about two things. And I know protest, but they say it was police militarization and Black Lives Matter. If they've added more police to the fray, why then did less people show up? And where's the far left targeting the building? They stopped protesting as soon as the Democratic governor sent in state police. You'd think that by bolstering the police force, the people who have been demanding defunding the police would be even angrier. Yet for some reason, they're not there anymore. The Guardian says on Wednesday, Oregon's Governor Kate Brown agreed with the White House that the state police would take over responsibility for guarding the courthouse after weeks of escalating protest. She said that Trump's troops were behaving like an occupying army in Portland and provoking unrest with heavy-handed tactics. In contrast, the state troopers did not intervene even when the scale of protests on Thursday night passed the point as demonstrators shook the fence around the courthouse, at which, in early demonstrations, the federal agents generally fired tear gas, stun grenades, and baton rounds. I don't know where this baton round thing came from. It may be they're using them. I've seen people say that. My understanding is they were using rubber bullets. But as we've seen with the videos of Mayor Ted Wheeler, it was not about shaking the fence, but it was about the far left lobbing mortar shells and, the commercial grade fireworks. Now, to be fair, it could be that they just generally retreated, that they started shaking the fence. The law enforcement refused to come out. People are getting bored. And at a certain point, people stop showing up. That can be true. It's also entirely fair to say maybe it is. When the feds come out and actually try to stop it, it's like a Chinese finger trap. The more they tell the far left to stop getting rowdy, the more the far left will actually start instigating and engaging, looking for that fight. It's fair to point out, man, these mortar shells the far left throw don't do anything. Well, let's read a little bit more about what they say. In the absence of confrontation, and with the state police remaining largely unseen inside the courthouse, tensions quickly eased. Without the federal forces to draw attention, protest organizers kept the focus on Black Lives Matter and reform of the Portland police. Some in the crowd worked to avoid trouble by stopping demonstrators from lighting fires and shooting fireworks at the courthouse as they had done previous nights. And there it is. As soon as they send, wait, hold on, man. This is what's really troubling me on this story. As soon as the governor sends in more police, the protesters actually stopped Antifa from engaging in violence. Now, why didn't they do this sooner? All right, look, I'm not going to pretend there's like a grand conspiracy or anything. I'm going to say it again. I don't know. But I'll say this. Good on the protesters for finally stopping the violence. How about that? But if that's the case, let's be real about what's going on. A mutual de-escalation. It's a good thing. Let's be optimistic about it. I'm glad to hear it. The federal law enforcement didn't have to come out because the protesters were stopping Antifa. Okay, let me read that for you again. Some in the crowd worked to avoid trouble by stopping demonstrators from lighting fires. It stands to reason that the only reason the feds did not come out is because the protesters have finally started policing the far left themselves. Seems then that problem solved, right? Now, look, the Portland demonstrations are still blocking traffic. This is a tweet from Portland police. People are in the street blocking traffic in downtown Portland, blah, blah, blah. And many people have complained about this. No. This is fine. OK, I think what we're looking at is de-escalation. I'm happy to hear it. And the real story, it would seem, is that the protesters have finally started shutting Antifa down. Maybe it's for a political victory. I'll tell you what, that's the victory they're going for, because even though the Guardian acknowledges it's the people stopping the mortars and the fires, they frame it as though the withdrawal of federal troops, which is just not true. Let me frame this properly for you. Portland sees peaceful night of protests following protesters stopping Antifa from targeting the federal courthouse. What we need to understand here as this narrative progresses, and undoubtedly they will start claiming the feds caused this. The feds weren't there until the 39th night when Antifa came out, broke into the courthouse and started a fire. That's when federal troops came in to stop them. They've been throwing paint, they've been throwing bricks, bottles, cans of beans. They've been starting fires. And there are videos of these people fanning flames and no one doing anything about it. Maybe. Here's what I think it might be, to be honest. There are activist organizations that are absolutely in favor of the Democrats and absolutely oppose Donald Trump. They don't care if people are targeting Trump with these tactics of fires. I should say DHS, because then they post photos. All their allies in media, as they put it, do the work for them. But, they'll put out snippets and like press releases and make false claims, which become the narrative for the mainstream media. But as soon as they claim victory, as soon as they try to claim victory, they need to make sure they look good now. It's all part of the propagandistic warfare. So first and foremost, what can I say? I'm glad it's calming down. More importantly, do not let them change the narrative. That's what they're going to do. Unfortunately for DHS and for the police, they are not engaging in this level of propaganda. So now that we're seeing nothing happening, they say, a night of calm, they're going to blame the police. That's what they've been doing the whole time, when in reality, even the Guardian acknowledges it's them. They're the ones stopping this. They say this. Despite the concerns of many in the crowds that the Trump administration would not fulfill the agreement to pull back the federal officers, none were seen on the streets. Trump tweeted that the agents would remain in Portland until Brown brings the protests led by anarchists and agitators under control. If she can't do it, the federal government will do it for her. We will not be leaving until there is safety. Now, again, I want to be fair. Let's just put it in more of a neutral fashion. Maybe these protesters, now seeing an opportunity for de-escalation, have decided to actually step in and stop Antifa. They could have done it at any time, apparently. They're now just deciding to do it. It could also be that they realized, many of the activists, because they started tweeting these things out, that the riots were making Trump look good, as I stated, numerous times. We saw recently, they started pushing a narrative that the agitators were actually white supremacists. It's not proven, though they've made several claims about other protests in other cities. They started making claims that, Trump was the one instigating it. But in reality, when people saw the violence and the unrest, they just sided with Donald Trump. His polls started to do well. And that's when Democratic, resistance members, high profile individuals started arguing that the people in black who were throwing explosives may as well be wearing Trump badges. All of a sudden, they're now stopping them. They tried the narrative first. Actually, no, it's white supremacy. It's white supremacy. When that didn't work, all of a sudden they said, well, these people are just supporting Trump. And you had the one guy, I don't know, what is his name? Kasparov, he's a chess master or whatever, argue that the far left wanted Trump to win because they'll be marginalized under Joe Biden. And I believe that's true to an extent. But the argument that the far left is doing this because they want Trump to win, I think it's a bit of a stretch. It is fair to say many of them do, for sure, but they're mostly doing it because they're angry, naive. Many of these people are just poor, kind of reckless, and mindless. A lot of the people we've seen who have started the fires don't pay attention, don't care. So I would actually argue it's that the left was trying to actually fan the flames to make Trump look bad. And then once it backfired on them, the narrative shifted. And now they're trying to get Antifa to stop. And lo and behold, they had the ability to do it the whole time. That's what I see when Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland actually says he wants a ceasefire. Not that he can control Antifa in the sense that he's telling them what to do, but in the sense that he could have the activists actually shut him down and the police could shut them down as well. And that's what's happening. Brown and Portland's mayor, so that's Governor Brown and Portland's mayor, Ted Wheeler, said the state and city police would seek to de-escalate protests rather than confront demonstrators. Wheeler said that the city's police, state troopers, and county sheriff's office had agreed not to use tear gas except where there was a threat to life or serious injury. The federal officers are using CS gas broadly, indiscriminately, and nightly. That is why it is escalating, and the behavior we're seeing on the streets rather than de-escalating it, and that's why this must come to an end. Wheeler apologized for the Portland police using tear gas in late May and June to break up Black Lives Matter protests. It should never have happened. Earlier in the day, Portland police cleared the two parks in front of the courthouse and county jail that served as a staging ground for the protest. Officers then sealed the parks off and marked them as closed, but that appeared strangely provocative and difficult to enforce. When a few protesters tore down the yellow police tape and began chanting, "Whose park? Our park," the Portland city officers quietly left the park and were not seen again for the rest of the evening. Now, I do want to absolutely point out something I've said very, many times. It's something I refer to as a Chinese finger trap problem. When you want to pull your fingers out, and in fact, it actually just makes the trap tighter. What we may be seeing, at least in part, is that because the federal forces now have reinforcements, they don't need to come out. And thus, there's less engagement between the far left agitators and the federal law enforcement. And because Portland police have tried to avoid engaging, they are now doing something seemingly counterintuitive, which calms things down. This is all good, in my opinion. I hope that all of the violence stops. The only thing I'm concerned about is the narrative, the framing that they're going to go for. It's not necessarily the fault of federal law enforcement that they were being attacked. Oh, I'm sorry. It's literally not their fault. They were being attacked. And they responded with tactics to try and disperse the crowd. Maybe they used the wrong tactics. I'm not entirely sure. I'll tell you this. The far left had breached the courthouse on more than one occasion and was setting fires. They've injured and may have permanently injured several of these federal officers. They've bolstered the police presence, which makes all of the police more secure. So let me just put it this way. What we've seen in Chicago, funding the police works. That's just the reality. And I said it. They mentioned that in Chicago, one thing they did was create it's called like the Critical Incident Response Team. It's a police unit specifically designed to police and secure large demonstrations. From this and another unit, crime has gone down. It would seem that with more police and more funding, crime goes down, and perhaps you actually get peaceful protests. The moment that Oregon deployed their state police, what happened? Things started to de-escalate. That's a combination of, yes, Portland trying to avoid confrontation, the activists telling the far left not to engage and actually stopping them. But all in all, because the police were bolstered, felt more secure, and early in the day cleared out certain areas. So make sure people realize this when they try and play this game about Trump's secret police. Now, of course, they'll argue, but see, the Democrat police did the right thing. Yeah, when they were reinforced, when there were more cops there. These circumstances are rather complicated, to say the least. But I believe that the narrative, of course, will always be framed as though Trump did everything wrong. If things hold this way, okay, if the protests calm down, if we stop seeing the violent rioting, which it seems like we've got a good break, then good. Let it stop, let it end. And in the end, it may mean the end of things. It may be the end of the violence in Portland going on now for 60 plus days. Tonight will be another critical night. Last night, there were large protests. They did come out with shields. They did block the streets, but the protesters stopped Antifa, and that stopped the escalation. The bolstering of police secured the building. And for the most part, I'll tell you this, man, It really was the protesters deciding now was the time to stop Antifa. Good on them. No, I mean it 100%. Good on them for stopping the violence. If you want to protest and block streets, by all means, go ahead and do it. Just stop lobbing explosives. Tonight, they will need to keep up the same pressure. Because I'll tell you this, when they didn't, we can see this group of umbrellas and shields engaging with the police. And Andy No mentioned they lacked huge crowds. It was only when the actual peaceful demonstrators stopped the far left extremists did things start to die down. Okay, complicated, nuanced, whatever, kind of a whatever rant. But I thought it was important to do the update simply because this could be the end of the violence in Portland. Now, many people who have been getting their entertainment from watching the live streams are maybe disappointed, but this is a good thing, man. Look, we don't want it. We don't want the false narratives. We don't want the fighting. We don't want people getting injured. Let's have everybody peacefully demonstrate and then, go about their business. I will mention one final thought, though. I think it's funny that everything calms down when the police were bolstered. I thought they were protesting the police militarization. Sure, when the protesters decided not to engage and to stop the extremists with more police presence, everything calms down. Funny how that works, isn't it? Whatever. I'll leave it there. Kind of just a rant. I'll see you all in the next segment at 4 p.m. at youtube.com/timcast, or just go to timcast.net. Thanks for hanging out.